want to go up there now?
Hugh Kennedy is a Shropshire landowner and medieval armour expert. 10 years ago, he became intrigued by a device depicted by Leonardo da Vinci. The drawing represents an apparatus for throwing dead horses, a gravity-powered catapult called a trebuchet. Inspired by the power of a machine that could hurl such heavy missiles, Hugh decided to try his hand at building one, a quest which led to this piano-flinging contraption. His gravity-powered catapult is made from a laminated beam, scrap metal, telephone poles and steel cables. In essence, a trebuchet is a giant seesaw with a heavy weight at one end and a much lighter missile at the other. As the heavier weight drops, a sling whips the lighter projectile towards the enemy. Hugh is convinced that Warwolf must have been a trebuchet slinging dense stone spheres.
If you chuck a thing that heavy at a stone wall, it'll shatter it. Stone missiles are a lot more effective than grand pianos.
Hugh's confidence in the destructive capability of a medieval trebuchet is about to be put to the test. Masons are preparing hard sandstone. Each ball weighs over 100 kilos, 250 pounds. Others are building the target, a wall made of sandstone and lime mortar. It's an accurate reconstruction of the upper section of a typical 13th century castle. Hugh's challenge is to build a trebuchet capable of smashing the wall to smithereens. But at a range of 200 yards, he will require precision aiming as well as brute force. Michael Prestwich, a medieval historian, will ensure that Hugh's next trebuchet will itself be based on an authentic 13th century design.
And I suppose it's when it's got to the top of its trajectory and it starts coming down again, and it really looks quite frightening.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I wasn't standing underneath it.
It'd bust up a building all right, wouldn't it?
It's the first time I've seen a full-scale trebuchet in operation. To see the high trajectory of it and the way the missile and the sheer speed with which it falls, it's a fantastic sight. Trebuchets began in the Far East, in China, but what they were there were hand-pulled machines, worked by quite large teams of men. Prepare to loose, loose! In many ways quite limited in what they could do. The big advance came when Arab engineers got hold of these devices and put a big counterweight on, so that instead of teams of men pulling it, the beam was pulled down by a great counterweight. They were far more potent and far more effective. These machines were picked up by Western engineers, and by the middle of the 13th century, it's very clear that French, English engineers were capable of building really quite large machines.
Some of the best military engineers were employed by Edward I, a master of military tactics. He was one of the most vicious and single-minded rulers of his time. Soon after ascending the throne in 1274, Edward decided to crush the independent Welsh princes and bring Wales under his personal command.
He was a bully, frankly. And I think many people would think of him as a really nasty piece of work. He was utterly determined. Nothing was going to get in his way.
Edward erected a number of powerful castles. They formed a chain ringing the stronghold of the Welsh mountains. His underlying strategy is explained by military historian Richard Holmes.
He built 8 new big castles, which were really state-of-the-art. They were immensely strong, well thought out. And most of them could be supplied by water, so they're very difficult for the Welsh to besiege. And Edward believed that you control the countryside by castles like this. They're like nails holding the landscape down, and their garrisons could issue out, attack enemies in the area. And until the castle was taken, nobody could really dominate that landscape.
Edward and other English lords designed their Welsh strongholds with the trebuchet in mind. For example, Caerphilly Castle was surrounded by man-made lakes that kept a besieging army and its weapons at a distance.
Castles were what modern tacticians would call force multipliers. They enabled a relatively small garrison to operate at the absolute maximum of effectiveness. And a castle like this is carefully organized to maximize defensive firepower. There are loopholes in the walls and the towers for archers to shoot through. And here the walls are cunningly organized so that the second set of walls is higher than the first. And therefore an attacker facing this face of the castle not only gets the defensive fire of the first wall, but he's got archers shooting at him from the higher walls behind it. It's a real nightmare.
So ideally, any trebuchet would need to be out of arrow range. But would it still be effective at that distance?
Hugh, how close are you going to have to bring your trebuchet to the walls to do serious damage, do you think?
Probably 200 yards. We will need to be within that to smash it up.
At 200 yards, is Hugh's trebuchet out of range of archers defending the castle? To represent the trebuchet's chief operator, a dummy is placed at that distance.
I'm sure an arrow would land amongst us if we're at that range. That you can easily shoot 200 yards with that massive bow of yours, can't you?
Yeah, well,
but
300 yards.
Yes. Well, for 200 yards, I think it would be putting you a bit worried, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
Now, I'm the first to accept that from this sort of range, the trebuchet would be doing serious damage to castle walls. But I think this does suggest that it's no easy business, and a garrison that knows its business can probably keep a trebuchet at the very limit of its range. And the fact that we had some going over the top, I think is mighty hopeful from the archer's point of view.
I wonder what happens if you slap one into him from here. Good, come on, then. Yes, all right, he swallowed it, hasn't he?
Gone right through the dummy, kept only in by the fletchings.
Bit of a bellyache, I reckon, yeah.
Edward I's castle-building campaign in Wales had taught him how to construct well-designed fortresses, maximising the defensive skills of archers and architects. When he turned his attention to conquering Scotland, Edward was faced with the opposite problem. Did he also have the ability to conduct successful attacks? As the king marched northwards, he brought with him some of the biggest siege engines or trebuchets ever built. The results were unexpected, according to historian Michael Prestwich.
The siege of Calavrock, conducted by Edward I in 1300, we've got, remarkably, a really good account of this, a contemporary poem. It describes the way in which the knights rode up to the castle, all in their great armour, trying to perform great deeds of valour.